I'm Paulie Stewart, Alwood resident, long time St Kilda resident. Played in a few bands over the years, the Painters and Dockers, and East Timorese Australian band, the Delhi All Stars, and actually a third band, the Transplants, where all the members have had liver transplants. So, yep, that's me. But my dad used to fascinate me with stories about World War II in St Kilda, because he grew up at the peanut farm, which is located right next to Luna Park. He'd say to me, you know, the heaviest fighting of the war wasn't in the Pacific or Germany, it was in the laneways of St Kilda between the visiting American troops and the Australian troops. But a really good friend of my dad's was a guy called Dennis Farrington, who was actually the barber in Ackland Street. And he was only a young guy at the time when the Americans arrived, but he fell in love with the music that the Americans brought, which, you know, before the war in, you know, Melbourne, the music was, it's a long way to Tipperary. But then the Americans arrived, and suddenly overnight it went to dun 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 dun. So the swing bands all came in, and this friend of my dad's, Dennis Farrington, ended up managing like 40 different bands, and St Kilda was alive with music in those days, my dad reckons. There was a big nightclub where the McDonald's is at the end of Ackland Street, and that was one of the first big nightclubs in Melbourne, and they had lots of swing bands there, and the only thing that's left from this amazing old building are the palm trees that they put in around the perimeter, and then they ripped it down and put up the McDonald's, which is pretty horrible. Yeah, but my dad also took my mum on her first date to the Palais de Dance, which was a big old Art Deco dance hall next to Luna Park. And he used to tell me this story how, you know, it was prohibition in those days, so you couldn't, you know, get alcohol anywhere, but he saved up and you know, for 2 weeks, and he knew a sly grogger in St Kilda, and he went and bought a bottle of champagne and 2 beers, and he took my mum out on this date, and he had them on the table at the Palais de Dance, and the police arrived, and they walked up to his table and said, "Whose alcohol is this?" And he said, "Oh, I don't know, it's just sitting there." And they went, "Great." And they took him, and he'd bring that story up on a regular basis, so I don't think he ever got over it. And my dad always used to say, you know, when we were all sitting around a Christmas Day or a birthday, you know, night, he'd always just say, "Look, all I ever did was ask her out to the pictures, you know, and now look at all you guys, you know, like it was supposed to be one night at the pictures, you know." You know, I had older brothers and sisters who were into the Beatles and the Stones and Bob Dylan. I'd go, "Oh yeah, they're okay." But you know, what happened to our family in 1975 was my oldest brother, Tony, who was 21, was killed up in East Timor at a place called Ballabo. And I can remember it upset my mum. My mum never really got over it, you know, it span her out, and I was so sort of upset for her, and it sort of showed me, you know, hey, don't bank on being around forever, you know, so if you're going to live, do it all today. And I was angry, and, you know, and then I saw this band on Countdown who, you know, the opening lines were, you know, "I am an antichrist, I am an anarchist." And I went, I love this band. And I went to the Catholic boys' school that I was being educated at, and the principal said, "You're not to listen to this music, it's musical pornography." And I went, I've got to hear this stuff, you know. And then I ran up to this record shop, I'll never forget it, and there was an old hippie working there. And I said, "Oh, can you put the Sex Pistols on, mate, to give us a listen?" And he said, "Oh, they're rubbish, you know, they can't play their instruments, they're no good, they're horrible," you know. And just the fact that he hated them so much, you know, I just had to hear them. And then they came on, and I went, wow, this is great, and anybody can do this. And that sort of led to, you know, me joining the Painters and Dockers a few years later. A group of guys and girls used to follow a band called the Models around, and they loved them. And but another friend of ours, Billy Walsh, who played in the Cosmic Psychos, had all these parking fines, and he had a benefit booked for his band, but they needed an opening act. And Phil said to Billy, "Oh, I'll get a band together for the night." And I'll never forget, I was at South Melbourne Market over the banana stall, and I saw this guy, Phil, and he said, "Oh, Paulie, you know, remember me? I've seen you at a few gigs." And I went, "Oh, hi, mate, what's happening?" He goes, "You know, I'm forming this band. Didn't you know, play trumpet in the school band?" And I said, "Yeah, but they threw me out twice." And he said, "That doesn't matter. Just come along and play on one song." And I went, "Oh, okay." And so rocked up. We had a couple of rehearsals, then we rocked up to do this gig, and at a pub in Port Melbourne, and we called ourselves the Painters and Dockers because the real painters and dockers drank there. And we started playing our show, and the guy next door hated it so much he jumped the fence with an axe and started chopping up the mixing desk, which was just freaked everyone out. All the sort of kids that had come to see us just freaked out, and one of them rang the police, and the police arrived. And you know, the one rule at the Painters and Dockers pub was, you know, you could have a big joint, have a line of speed across the bar, walk around in the nude if you wanted, whatever, but no police were allowed on the premises. And they arrived, and an all-in brawl started between the police and the Painters and Dockers, and there was speakers falling and kids screaming and beer going up in the air and someone with a bloody nose. And it was during the one song I was doing, and I went, "I want to do this forever. This is the best thing that I've ever done. I want to do it, you know."
Wondering about the style of music that
Yeah.
the chaos of the shows.
Yes.
If the chaos of those kind of shows actually help you understand the chaos of life and the randomness of life.
Absolutely, Hayley. That was it. I just like the pure way that it just turned everything on its head, you know. And because when my brother died, I couldn't believe the whole world didn't stop, and that everybody was just not sort of outraged by it all, you know. But it was like, you know, it was only years later I went, well, everyone dies and every family goes through this. But at the time I was so sort of, I hated normality. I wanted to rock the system because I just couldn't believe that someone could be killed like that and nothing sort of happened about it. And so the music, which was very anarchistic, and like the wilder the shows, the better, you know. And I'll admit, you know, for the first 3 or 4 years of the Painters and Dockers, we actually couldn't play the instruments, and we'd go on stage and play, you know, "I'm Not Your Stepping Stone" by the Monkees for 45 minutes, one song, and that would be the whole show, you know. And it'd end up in a, you know, some big brawl, and I'd just stand back going, "I love this." Well, I've found bands like sort of Yes and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, these big progressive rock bands where it was, you know, and everyone was, you know, going off into their heads on the music. No. I wanted to be everyone to be in the spirit, and you know, and you know, just before sort of punk broke out, you know, bands were like, you know, the Rolling Stones or Led Zeppelin, who were on a big stage miles from their fans, you know. But I wanted, you know, a notable feature of the Painters and Dockers to this day is that half the audience end up on stage usually, you know, at our gigs. And, you know, we encouraged that the breakdown, and there was no barriers between the band and the audience, you know. That was really important to us. And we just wanted to, you know, send it all up and have fun. It's funny because in St Kilda in the sort of late 70s, you know, the punk scene hit, and, you know, Nick Cave, who's a fantastic artist, you know, he was God, but there were all these sort of, you know, private school kids who'd come take heroin and watch him and go, wow, you know, like, he's so cool, and, you know, and used to say, "Oh, life, woe is me," and we were like, "Nah, let's just go and drink, and have fun, and meet girls and boys and whatever you want to do, It was so exciting, for me. I think the first time I ever heard talk of gay rights was at the ballroom. Women's rights was at the ballroom. When I first went to the ballroom, there'd be a guy in a wedding dress, and you just go, what the is happening here? There'd be people, it was just off the wall, and there were no sort of rules, and everyone was so cool, and because we were all so young too, everyone looked so gorgeous, and there'd be a big night at the ballroom, and then there'd be, you'd all meet on the steps out the front, and then there'd be a party somewhere in St Kilda, and you'd all go to the party, and that was every weekend, and you met a new friend one weekend, and a new friend the next weekend, and pre-AIDS, it was all, love is in the air kind of thing, and it was so exciting. It was great, and the bands, the birthday party, they were wild, and a band called Grong Grong. I don't know if you remember them. They all wore balaclavas pre-tism and would eat raw meat on stage off bones and stuff like that. And yeah, there was just so many great bands. Yeah, and such a great vibe. And everyone lived in St Kilda too, because it was cheap then. And so all through St Kilda Elwood, there were flats full of people, and everyone sort of knew everyone. It was great. St Kilda was very much where we'd play all the time, and it was an incredible music scene. There were, people talking to young musos now, they don't believe me when I say, there was 4 or 5 nights a week bands, and there'd be 3 or 4 bands on the bill. There was so much music, it was fantastic, it was $2 to get in, and or you can drink for $1 or something. Like the SP, you could just walk in there any night of the week, and also the bands they had there, there's a band called Diana Kiss, I don't know if you can remember them, but Ross Hannaford played in them, and he was in Daddy Cool, and he was such a great player, and that was free every Monday night, and he had a residency for 25, 30 years, I think, that guy there, and yeah, but you just can't walk in and expect to see music anymore, which is a real shame. Well, I can remember in the day, you paid $5 to get in, you'd go, $5, you're ripping me off. Now you can't go and see a band where it's not $60, a ticket, which I find extraordinary. But the other big thing is that's happened, and having 2 daughters, they don't go and see live music like I used to. It's all online, or there's so many other distractions now from live music. Once used to be the thing you did because it was available and there were bands playing, but that whole sort of scene doesn't sort of exist anymore. So there's not the, you could never sort of live off it, because there was not much money involved, but at least you could play all the time. I lost my first liver in the SP. I reckon it's in the public bar there somewhere. I like the platform that it's given me, to tell you the truth. There'd be a lot of people who are into music for the music for itself, but I'm not really a musician, you know, I can't play anything and I can't sing, you know. It's funny, Hayley, because over the years people have come up and, you know, young crew going, oh, I'd love to be in a band like you and be able to sing. And I say, I can't sing. And they go, but what do you mean? I go, well, it's never stopped me. You don't actually need to sing. Just get up and just do it, you know. Don't worry about it too much. I can't believe, Hayley, that I've got, it's coming up to 16 years now since I had a liver transplant, which is outrageous. Because lying at the Austin Hospital in Heidelberg for about 18 months, it was, you know, I was really running along the edge of the abyss, you know, and I can't believe I've got to have all this extra time and do all this extra stuff. If some unknown Australian hadn't, you know, volunteered to donate a liver, I wouldn't be here. More and more I do get, you know, I wake up now going, well, I'm healthy. You know, everyone in my immediate love zone is healthy. Like, so it's a good day. You know, that's it. That's enough, really, you know.
What is a song or an album that's changed?
Oh, wow. Let me think. Oh, dear. The Bay City Rollers doing, what's that? What was this? I can't remember. What is it? I can't believe I can't remember it. The song that's changed my life, I can't remember it. Bye bye baby, baby goodbye. Yeah, Bay City Rollers, Bye Bye Baby. That's my song, yeah. Keep docking and dock on, that's it, dock on. That's our big thing, dock on, yeah.